again working under the long shadow of Boris Aronson. And that's a curse. He was a genius. First of all, he had an amazing imagination, and he also worked at a time where the resources on Broadway were enormous. And Follies was sort of famous for Boris Aronson's Loveland sequence. People were stunned. They sort of felt like they'd never seen opulence like that before on a Broadway stage. I knew I could never top what Boris Aronson did in terms of sort of sheer physical production. There wasn't ever going to be the money for that. And it seemed like it was a kind of trap to try to do that. This is the model for Follies. The set itself is quite simple. It's an empty backstage that's dilapidated, but really romantically dilapidated. It wants to have the sense that there are ghosts everywhere. It's full of history, and that it's a very, very extremely romantic place. This is all made to look like it's old, dilapidated brick, and these levels are more levels than you would really find in a real backstage. They're really there because we needed places for the ghosts to appear. This is a white model, so we didn't actually put color in this, but the way, in fact, that we treated this is that it's all sort of in blues and blacks. It's not a completely realistic paint treatment in terms of how the brick and the metalwork is painted. There are piles of junk in the corner. There are kind of remains of a once splendid staircase down here. The edges of the floorboards are all broken. The proscenium we based on some of the prosceniums of old vaudeville theaters, and it was built specifically for the show, but it's also built so that it looks like it's really partially destroyed. Large chunks of it are missing. The paint is crumbling. What you don't see in this model is what we did in the auditorium. The marquee is a number of things, but it is not charming. And it has virtually no sense of history. Follies and the Weissman Theater really has to have that sense of history. And when I looked around the Marquee Theater, the walls are covered with red wall-to-wall carpeting and 1980s brass trim. I kind of knew immediately we had to cover the entire theater. You can see what we did in the house here. We draped, really as much as we possibly could in the marquee. We draped all the way around to the back of the house. We even covered the columns back there. You can see we took the house lights down on the side and we put up our own work lights as sconces. I wanted it to feel like there was no separation between the stage and the auditorium itself, that when the audience walked in, we were all in that same room together.
See, I've been very perturbed of late, very upset, very betwixt and between. The things that I want, I don't seem to get. The things that I get, you know what I mean?
Steve Sondheim gave me one note when I started working on Follies. Practically the only time he's ever given me a directive before I worked on something, and it was really, really useful. He said, the Loveland set can't be floating in the midst of the dilapidated old stage. It has to be the full universe. So for me, it was discovering what was the sort of essence of Loveland. And it's both an idea about romance, and that's certainly what those flowers were all about. But there's also a real sexual element to that. People have compared the Loveland set to, well, let's just say that they described it as anatomical. And I hadn't deliberately set out to do that, but I also think that that's not all bad for Loveland.